baseless, its spokesperson on Twitter refuting the allegations raised in the US media report. And that's after the foreign ministry in Iran said this was cooked up by the US. This was a ready-to-order media report because of course, this came out in the US media. Let's take this further. Professor Seyed Marandi is an international relations expert at the University of Tehran. We'll speak to him shortly, but first let's hear a bit more from our correspondent Nick Harper.
The alleged assassination plot signals a major escalation in tensions between the US and Iran. News of the plan first came from the publication Politico in the United States. It said that US government officials have reportedly been aware of a possible attempt against the ambassador Lana Marks's life since earlier this year. However, within the last few weeks, officials have gained more specific intelligence details. Now they're saying that the Iranian Embassy in Pretoria is part of this assassination plot. Well, the assassination is allegedly in retaliation for the Trump administration's decision to kill the top Iranian general, Hassan Soleimani. A US drone strike targeted him while he was in Iraq in January this year. Although Lana Marks appears to have very few ties to Iran, she is a personal friend of President Trump. She's a member of the Mar-a-Lago Club in Florida, and she's a major donor to his campaign. And it's thought that that personal connection with the president is the reason for her becoming a target. Now, Marks was born in East London, South Africa, before becoming a handbag designer for the rich and famous. She was appointed to the position of ambassador to South Africa just under a year ago. Well, Iran's embassy in South Africa has called the plot a baseless accusation from a terrorist regime. The US State Department and the president himself have so far made no comment on the alleged plot. But South Africa's state security agency says that it's interacting with all relevant partners both in the country and abroad, while the Minister of State Security has said that South Africa has a duty to protect maximally all diplomatic officials in the country. Nick Harper, SABC News, Washington.
All right, let's speak to Professor Marandi, an international relations expert at the University of Tehran. Professor, thank you for joining us here in South Africa tonight. What do you make of the reports that Iran may be considering assassinating the US ambassador to South Africa? And we have to consider that Iran has emphatically denied that it is.
Yes, in Tehran, everyone is making fun of the accusation. This woman is a handbag designer. She is by no means the equivalent of General Qasem Soleimani, who was the person who defeated ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria. He was the person who had the most impact on the defeat of the terrorists that the United States itself, according to Trump, according to Trump himself, that the United States helped create. So there is no equivalence between an ambassador who is a handbag designer and such a person of such stature, first of all. Second of all, why in the world would Iran choose South Africa, which is a country that is very close to the hearts of Iranians? It is a country where the United States and the Europeans supported apartheid and racism for decades, whereas Iran was one of the key supporters of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Why would Iran choose such a country, such a place, to carry out such a ridiculous attack? The United States is constantly making ridiculous accusations against Iran. The only thing left really for the United States to accuse Iran of is global warming. And if someone could convince them that that would be a good way forward, they'd probably do that. So it's terrorism, it's nuclear weapons, it's everything, and now this as well. So no one here takes it seriously. And of course, we have to always remember, this is the same regime in Washington This is the same regime in Washington that said Saddam Hussein was developing nuclear weapons, that said Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons, that Iraq under Saddam Hussein was an imminent threat. They said they had intelligence, that Saddam Hussein was working with Al-Qaeda. I put out a couple of tweets today about this. The United States so-called intelligence community has zero credibility.
All right, talking about accusations, let's just look at what the foreign ministry in Iran wrote. We advise the American officials to stop resorting to hackneyed and worn-out methods for anti-Iran propaganda in the international arena. So that would suggest that the U.S. administration is planting these reports, using the U.S. media to try and discredit Iran?
Absolutely, and that's exactly actually what the United States did when it was supporting apartheid in South Africa. During the war in Angola, the United States used those methods. This is something that the Americans have been doing for decades. And when it comes to Iran, the United States has every reason to carry out psychological warfare, to carry out a campaign, an anti-Iranian propaganda campaign. On the one hand, it is Iran that supports terrorism, but who helped create ISIS?
Yeah.
Who helped create Al-Qaeda? We know who created Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. It was the Americans and Saudi Arabia. Then who helped support ISIS in Iraq and Syria? It was Saudi Arabia, the United States, Turkey, Jordan, Israel. We know this from the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012 that was partially released. We know that General Michael Flynn, who was the head of this intelligence agency at the time, admitted that the United States supported these countries in supporting the rise of the extremists in Iraq and Syria.
Professor,
so when the United
You say that South Africa is a friendly nation in Iran's eyes. But in 2015, Al Jazeera ran a report suggesting an extensive secret network of Iranian operatives operating in South Africa. Is that plausible?
Well, in 2015, with all due respect to Al Jazeera, they were supporting those same terrorist groups in Syria. And their government, according to WikiLeaks, the WikiLeaks documents reveal through Hillary Clinton's emails that up to 2014, Qatar and Saudi Arabia were funding ISIS. People can look this up. The WikiLeaks documents reveal this. So we know that at that time, Al Jazeera had its own agenda because Iran was fighting against ISIS. Iran was fighting against Al-Qaeda. And I think that South African intelligence in 2015 probably knew a bit more about what was going on in their country than Al Jazeera.
Yeah, but they wouldn't say. So you're being very skeptical about any media reports. So if Lana Marks is not a worthy target for this general that was killed in the drone strike, Iran expected to be looking for revenge. Could we see somebody else targeted? Who would that be? And then what happens? Because the US will feel compelled to return. We're getting close to elections. How do you see this all playing out?
Iran will ultimately expel the United States from this region. Iran will ultimately expel the occupation forces. Iran and its allies together across the region will expel occupation forces from this region, and that will be the revenge. The United States has to recognize the fact that it is on the decline. It is facing a major economic catastrophe. It has failed in the fight against corona. The internal strife in the United States is growing, is dividing the nation into two hateful sides, and the United States is becoming increasingly isolated across the board and across the international community.
But Professor, this is the long game. In the short term, do you expect that somebody will be killed in retaliation for that general who was killed, although it may not be Lana Marks, the US ambassador to South Africa?
No, I don't take any of this seriously. I don't believe that Iran is going to carry out any such assassination anywhere. Iran's focus is driving the regime in Washington out of the Persian Gulf region because it is a regime that only creates havoc and destruction. The United States destroyed Libya. The United States and the Saudis have destroyed Yemen. The regime in Washington has destroyed much of Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Cuba. It is strangling multiple countries. It is a regime that behaves in a thuggish manner. And the Iranians are a people that are very fierce when it comes to their independence. And the American regime supported ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria and Iraq in order to undermine the Syrian government. We know that Kerry, who was the Secretary of State of the United States, we know that Kerry said in a meeting with so-called Syrian activists that the United States allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus to put pressure on the government. Yeah. That is how dirty the Americans play. And General Soleimani was one of the people who blocked them. We know that Obama, in an interview, I think with The Atlantic, said they allowed ISIS to advance on Baghdad. Again, it was Qasem Soleimani who went to Baghdad and stopped ISIS. So I think the United States, the truth is the exact opposite of what comes out of Washington.
All right. Thank you for your interesting analysis. That was international relations expert Professor Seyed Marandi from Tehran. Before we go, let's take a look at your weather. In fact, that's a wrap from me and the team. Thank you for being with the Full View tonight. I hope you found our packed show interesting.